This is a walkthrough of the Archivers web app, which we use to enable volunteers at data rescue events to collaborate with one another during the event and to contribute remotely afterward. Our goal is to capture government, policy, and scientific data sets in a high-quality, citable way. Labeling the data sets that we capture carefully so that researchers can find them again if they go missing is the most important step of the process. We're very careful to respect the terms of use of all of the sites that we visit. Now, the vast majority of the data we're interested in is publicly available, public domain data, which we can freely download. But if you find yourself on a site where you need to create a username and password to proceed, or you're not sure that everything you're looking at is freely available, skip it and move on. There's plenty of free stuff to focus on, and that's all we want to do with this app. Before you get started, you should join us on our Slack. We have a Slack used by volunteers at all of the events. The developers of the app are there and the organizers to answer questions, so you can get help from your fellow volunteers and from people who've done perhaps several events. So if you go to this website, archivers-slack.herokuapp.com, and enter your email address, you'll promptly receive an email which will give you a link to join the Slack. Once you're in the Slack, you can get in touch with your local event organizers to get an invitation link to join the app. So instead of this front screen, you'll follow a link and you'll see something like this. This particular URL that you see in the video won't work for you, but you'll get a URL, of course, that will. So you'll enter some username, like example user 123, and a password. Check out the disclaimer, and then sign up. And now you're in the app. What you're looking at here is a list of URLs that are of interest. Some of them have been specifically flagged by researchers. Others have been nominated by volunteers, sometimes using the Chrome extension, which you might also have separately seen, where volunteers can nominate URLs, some of which will end up in this app. On the right side, we see the links to the actual sites. So if I were to click one at random here, that would open up a tab that would actually visit the site. And on the left, we see a link to a unique ID link, which is a link to our record of everything we know about the URL so far. I'm going to use the search bar to filter the results by URL and pick out this specific example. At the top, we see the address itself, then the unique ID that we've given it, and the status of where it is in our process, which I'll explain more about shortly. On the right, also, we give it a priority from 1 to 10, where 10 would be the highest priority. This is just a rough estimate of the value or vulnerability of the dataset in question. In the main section here, the top section, we have some information that could have come in from the volunteer that originally flagged this dataset. In this case, all we know is the page title. Sometimes also agency and additional information is included. In order to start working on this URL, you have to click Check Out, and this is our way of ensuring that only one person cannot work on a URL at a time. Until I do that, I'd be unable to do anything on the lower half of this screen, so it's important to remember to click that button or you'll find you won't be able to type in the rest of the app. So now I'll be the user that has access to the URL until I check it back in. Note that you can only check out one URL at a time, which is an intentional limitation, just to keep things moving. So the first section that we'll need to fill out is the research section. And this is really the most important section where we describe what data is available at this URL. So the page titles here, volunteer has already filled in quite a lot of information about the significance of the data set. If we can get this information from a domain scientist that actually has used this data, that's the ideal case. But really any information in as much detail as possible is helpful. We're also making notes here about how the data could be captured, trying to look at, is this just static content or is it dynamic content with an interactive visualization or a search bar? If it's just static, simple, old-fashioned HTML web page, then this is something we can actually rely on the Internet Archive to harvest for us. The Internet Archive, also known as the Wayback Machine, takes regular snapshots of websites and stores them. They have an entire infrastructure already set up to do this, and in fact they specifically do this at the end of any presidential term. So this is an example of dates at which the nasa.gov main page has been captured. If it's a simple website, again, with just static HTML, then this is something that the Internet Archive can capture and will have already been nominated if the URL is at this point in the process. So if that's the case, we just check Do Not Harvest. We rely on the Internet Archive to capture it, and we're done. If it has any interactive content, or if you're not sure and you think it might have some interactive content, then we keep going with the rest of this process, and we try to label how this resource could be manually captured by a volunteer, since we can't rely on the Internet Archive to fully capture everything about it. These remaining checkboxes in the research section just describe the kinds of content that might be in there. If it has structured files, like a big stash of Excel files or CSVs, or even many PDFs, these are not very conveniently captured by the Internet Archive, so even if the archive might be able to grab it, we like to grab it just to be sure. Likewise for FTP sites, or any data that's accessible through some programmatic API or search box, and we have different designations here just to help future volunteers understand what they're looking at. Additionally, you can make some handwritten notes about how the data could be harvested. We also like to know what file formats to expect and an estimated size of the files. Of course, once we capture it, we'll know exactly how big it is. So this is just an estimate to give us a sense of how long it might take to download. Finally, there's a feature where you can merge this link with other links in a sort of temporary way. This is a way of marking a URL as related to others. And it might mean that those URLs all reference the same data, or it might just mean that they're similar and that the strategy used for scraping one would also be useful in scraping others. Once this phase is complete and we've marked everything we want to say about research, we click this checkbox in the upper right, and that marks the research phase as done and allows us to proceed to the next phase, which is the harvest phase. If I click on harvest, this section will now expand. So the first thing to do is to download the zip starter, and this is just a zip file with some directories and some files in it that'll help us organize the data that we manually scrape from the website. So here I guess I've skipped the step where you figure out how to download the data. That's up to you using some script or some tool like wget. Let's assume that you've downloaded the data to your personal computer and now you want to upload it and have it be permanently archived. When you download this zip starter, you're going to get a zip file with something like this. It has a name that matches the unique ID in the app, as you can see here. And opening this, we see there's a directory to put the data that you've downloaded in, and a directory to put in any scripts or notes on how you captured the data, so we can reconstruct exactly what was done later. Additionally, there's this automatically generated metadata file that will be used for carefully labeling the data in our system. So once you've put your data in here and you've put your tool scripts in here, you come back up and you make a zip file out of this using compress. There we go, compress, and we've turned this into a zip file. Come back down to the harvest section, upload this file. So there's our zip file. Upload. Boom. And now we can mark the harvest phase as complete. If you have a really large file, then you can actually do this directly through Amazon Web Services, which is a more advanced process that if you don't know how to do this, you could get some help from another volunteer that might have experience with Amazon Web Services. So I'm not going to address this right half as part of this app. We're just assuming you have less than 5 gigabytes to upload here. You should make some notes on how you managed to capture the data, and then finally save your work at the end of the process, and then you can mark the harvest stage as complete. And that's pretty much it. For any more questions, see our FAQ, which is linked to the top, or use the Slack to get some help.